Hey, fourth graders, we're going to do more fractions today. I hope things are going great and well at home. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we begin, I have a fraction joke for you. And the fraction joke is, well, it's not really a joke, there's just a punchline to it. But, you know, I really don't get why some people use fractions. I mean, they're pointless. Because if you remember, you can write numbers that are less than 1 as fractions or as decimals. And so decimals have the point, right? The decimal point. So fractions are pointless. Now, not pointless as in like having no meaning, but pointless as in having no decimal. Don't get the wrong idea there. So yeah, another great joke from Mr. D. That one's definitely one of the tippity top, cream of the crop, top shelf stuff there. So if you remember, we talked about yesterday, we talked about how fractions are numbers that are less than 1. Now, if you have a fraction that's just standing alone by yourself, that number is less than 1 whole. Now, you can have mixed numbers like 3 and 3/4, where there's a whole number with a fraction next to it. In that case, together, it's worth more than 1. Oops, I dropped my marker lid. Oops, I dropped it again. Oops, I dropped it again. Got it. But just the fraction part is less than 1. So we learned how fractions are less than 1. Today we're going to look at numbers, at fractions on a number line. So let's say I have a number line here, and then right here is going to be 0. And then because we're dealing with fractions, what number do you suppose this is going to be? You guessed it, it's going to be 1. Because fractions are less than 1. So we're going to be dealing with this space in between. So let's say we're going to be comparing fractions today based on a number line. So let's say I had 2 fractions. I had a fraction that was 3/4, and I had a fraction that was 2/3. And we want to know whether that fraction is less than, greater than, or equal to. Well, today it's going to put it on a number line for you, but you could put it on a number line yourself. 2/3 would be about right there. We can think about if we took this line, this from 0 to 1, and spaced it into 3 equal chunks, this would be about the distance for 2 of those chunks. And we also want to find 3/4 of the number line. So 3/4 is actually going to be right about there. 3/4 is just a little teeny tiny bit bigger than 2/3. And again, if we thought of this space from 0 and 1 and broke it up into 4 chunks, you know, this would about be 1, and then 2, and then 3/4 would about be right there. So when we're looking at this on the number line, and we're trying to figure out which one's less than, greater than, or equal to, well, the one that's going to be less, the one that's worth less, is going to be the one that's closest to 0. And the one that's going to be worth more is going to be the one that's closest to 1. 1 is a bigger number than 0, so the fraction that's closest to 1 is going to be the bigger fraction. So when I look at 3/4 and I'm comparing it to 2/3, I can ask myself, out of 3/4 and 2/3, which one is closer to 1? Or on the opposite of that, you could say, out of 3/4 and 2/3, which one is closer to 0? You could ask either question. But if we look at this, it's clear, it's easy to see, okay, 3/4, yeah, 3/4 is closer to 1 than 2/3. So that means 3/4 is going to be bigger than 2/3. And when we're doing it on a number line, that's really all we have to do. Especially today, it's going to put the number line on it for you. But let's do one where we have to put it on the number line ourselves. Let's say, so I have my number line here again. I have 0, and I have 1 whole. And let's say I'm trying to compare, let's do 1/3 and 5/6. So with this one, if I'm going to put these numbers on the number line, the way I'm going to have to do that is I need to think of myself, okay, I always like to put 1/2 here in the middle. 1/2 is a really easy number for my brain to picture. 0 is also an easy number for me to picture. 1 is also an easy number to picture. And I put 1/2 because I know 1/2 is exactly in the middle between 0 and 1. So when I'm trying to put fractions like this on a number line, what I do is I ask myself which side of 1/2 they fall on, whether it's bigger than 1/2 or smaller than 1/2. And I found that helps me quite a bit. So if I look at 1/3, well, 1/3, going back to yesterday, 1/3 is 1 part shaded out of 3. And 1/2 is 1 part shaded out of 2. So that means that 1/3 is actually going to be, right about here on the number line. And most of the time I don't have to draw a picture for that. I can just think to myself and go, oh, okay, I can see 1 part out of 3 being less than 1 part out of 2. I can sort of visualize that in my head and say 1/3 goes right down the number line. Now 5/6, there's 6 parts total, and 5 of them, all of the pieces except for 1 is shaded. So that means 5/6 is going to go pretty close here to the 1. Because if there was just 1 more piece shaded, it would be all the way to the 1. So now I can ask myself, okay, out of 1/3 and 5/6, which one is closest to 1? And you guessed it, it's 5/6. So that means that 1/3 is less than 5/6. Let's try another one. One last one. So I'll draw my number line one more time. And then I'll have, let's do a bigger number line. I have my 0, and I have my 1. That's not much bigger number line, is it? So let's say that I am comparing 4/7 and 2/5. Now to put these on a number line, remember I always like to put my 1/2 there in the middle. And I just kind of like to do that because then it kind of gives me 2 buckets to put numbers in. Like if one's on this side and one's on this side, it's really easy for me to know which one's bigger than or smaller than. If both of them are in sort of the same bucket between 1/2 and 1 and 0 and 1/2, I have to do a little bit more, but that's kind of just an initial quick way for me to do it. So 4/7. I kind of need to ask myself, is 4/7 in this 1/2 to 1 range, or is 4/7 in this 0 to 1/2 range? The way you can think about halves is that this 1/2, this top number has to be exactly 1/2 of the bottom number for it to equal 1/2. So what I mean by that is that if you double the top number and that becomes bigger than the bottom number, then you know that you have a fraction that's greater than 1/2. On the opposite side of that, if you take the top number and double it and it's smaller than the denominator, that means that it's less than 1/2. So let me show you. If I do 4 plus 4, just to double it, I'm not doing any math. This is just kind of a way for me to check of whether it's bigger than 1/2 or smaller than 1/2. But if I doubled 4 and have it equal 8, 8 is bigger than 7, so I know that 4/7 is bigger than 1/2. And 4/7 is actually just barely bigger than 1/2. And you could picture that in your head and say, well, 3 out of 7 would be a little bit smaller than 1/2, so 4 out of 7, there's only 3 pieces left, so that's going to be a little bit bigger than 1/2. This other one is 2/5, and again, if I double that top number, 2 times 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 is less than 5, so 2/5 is actually just a teeny bit smaller than 1/2. So I'm going to put it's smaller than 1/2, so I'm going to put 2/5 just about right there. So then I can see, okay, is 2/5 or 4/7 bigger? And it is, 4/7. So with this one, the trick with putting it on a number line is just finding out where it goes and then asking, okay, which one's closer to 1? And the one that's closer to 1 is, my marker dropped again, is your answer. Thanks for watching. And remember that even though fractions are pointless, they are not pointless. Bye-bye.